The crimson light of Kepler 442b's twin suns cast long shadows across the makeshift execution grounds. 70,000 human colonists knelt in perfect rows, their hands bound behind their backs with energy shackles that hummed with a soft blue glow. The air was thick with fear, and the acrid smell of ozone from the alien technology that held them captive. High above the crowd, floating camera drones buzzed like mechanical insects, their lenses focused on every angle of the scene below. The Zephyrian Empire had spared no expense in producing this spectacle. They wanted the galaxy to see what happened to species that dared to defy their rule. Commander Vexhai stood on an elevated platform, his 6 arms spread wide in a gesture of supreme authority. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed in the alien sunlight, and his compound eyes reflected the terror of the humans below like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed the Zephyrian Imperial Seal, a coiled serpent wrapped around 3 dying stars. "Citizens of the galaxy," Vexhai's voice boomed through translation devices that carried his words across 100 star systems in real time. "Today you witness the price of rebellion. These humans thought they could establish colonies in Zephyrian space without permission. They thought their primitive weapons and crude technology could challenge an empire that has ruled for 10,000 years. The broadcast was being transmitted across every inhabited world, every space station, every ship in known space. On distant planets, alien beings stopped their daily activities to watch. Some felt pity for the humans. Others satisfaction that the upstart species was finally being put in their place. On Earth, in the emergency command bunker beneath the Pentagon, General Sarah Chen watched the feed with trembling hands. Around her, military officials and government representatives sat in stunned silence. The room's massive displays showed the faces of the condemned, farmers, engineers, teachers, children, people who had only wanted to build new lives among the stars. "Sir, we're receiving demands from the Zephyrian Empire," reported Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, his voice barely steady. "They want us to surrender all human colonies beyond Sol system. They're giving us 72 hours to comply, or they'll execute every human they can find." President Catherine Walsh, her face pale but determined, leaned forward in her chair. "How many humans are in Zephyrian space?" "Approximately 4 million across 17 colonies, Madam President," Chen replied. "They've made it clear that today's execution is just the beginning." Back on Kepler 442b, Vexhai continued his speech. "Let this serve as a lesson to all who would challenge the natural order. The Zephyrian Empire has dominion over this galaxy. We have conquered 1,000 species, absorbed their worlds, and made them serve our greater purpose. Humanity will be no different." The camera drones swooped lower, capturing the faces of the condemned. Many wept silently, others stared defiantly at their captors. A young woman in the front row, barely 20 years old, looked directly into one of the cameras. Her eyes held no fear, only a burning determination that seemed to pierce through the lens and reach across space itself. "You think you know humanity," she whispered, too quietly for the translation devices to pick up, but the cameras caught her lips moving. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." The execution weapons were a testament to Zephyrian cruelty. Instead of quick disintegration or plasma bolts, they had chosen neural scramblers, devices that would cause excruciating pain for several minutes before finally stopping the victim's heart. It was designed to maximize suffering and send a clear message to anyone watching. On Earth, in a secure facility hidden deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, another kind of preparation was taking place. The man they called the American Boogeyman sat in meditation, his breathing controlled and steady despite the chaos erupting around him. His real name was classified at a level so high that only 7 people on Earth knew it. To most, he was simply known as Operator Zero. He had been born in the final days of World War III, when humanity's capacity for violence had reached its absolute peak. The child of a Marine Corps sniper and a Special Forces medic, he had been raised in a world where survival meant being better at killing than anyone else. By the age of 12, he could field strip any weapon ever made. By 18, he had already served in conflicts on 3 different continents. But it wasn't just his skills with conventional weapons that made him legendary. The man had an intuitive understanding of violence that bordered on the supernatural. He could read the flow of a battle like others read books, anticipating enemy movements with an accuracy that defied explanation. Some said he was psychic. Others believed he was simply what happened when human evolution decided to create the perfect predator. The facility around him hummed with activity as technicians prepared equipment that had never been tested in actual combat. Project Prometheus had been humanity's secret weapon for nearly 2 decades. A combination of genetic enhancement, cybernetic augmentation, and psychological conditioning that pushed the human capacity for warfare beyond all known limits. Director Martinez watched from the observation deck as Operator Zero completed his meditation. The man stood slowly, his movements fluid, despite the massive frame hidden beneath his simple clothing. He was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet. But it wasn't his size that made people nervous. It was the complete stillness in his eyes, as if he had looked into the abyss so long that it had become part of him. "Sir, the President has authorized Operation Retribution," Martinez said through the intercom. "You have full discretionary powers. No rules of engagement, no limitations." Operator Zero nodded once. He had expected this day would come. Humanity had been expanding into space for nearly a century, and it was inevitable that they would encounter a species that viewed them as nothing more than animals to be culled. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in judgment. They had assumed that because humans were new to interstellar travel, they were weak. They were about to learn why humanity had clawed its way to the top of Earth's food chain. On the execution grounds, HFY raised one of his 6 arms. The neural scramblers powered up with a high-pitched whine that made the human prisoners flinch. Behind them, Zephyrian soldiers in their ceremonial armor stood at attention, their weapons trained on the crowd in case anyone attempted to escape. "Begin the execution," HFY commanded. The first row of prisoners convulsed as the neural scramblers fired. Their screams echoed across the landscape, amplified by the broadcast equipment so that every being in the galaxy could hear humanity's suffering. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of their agony for the galaxy to see. But even as the first humans died in unimaginable pain, something else was happening. In secret facilities across Earth, in hidden bunkers on Luna, in the asteroid mining stations of the Belt, humanity was mobilizing for war. Not the clean, sanitized conflicts they had fought among themselves, but something far more primal and terrible. The execution continued for hours, row by row, the Zephyrians methodical. The stealth ship Nemesis drifted through the void like a shadow given form, its hull absorbing electromagnetic radiation across every spectrum known to science. Inside, Operator Zero studied the holographic display showing the Zephyrian border fortress of Kethmore Station. The massive structure bristled with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets, its shields strong enough to withstand the blast of a small star going nova. It was also completely invisible to the station's sensors. 3 weeks had passed since the execution broadcast. In that time, the Zephyrian Empire had made good on their threats, hunting down and capturing human settlements across their territory. Millions of humans were now prisoners, facing the same fate as those 70,000 who had died on live broadcast. The galaxy had responded with the predictable mixture of outrage and fear. The Galactic Council had issued a strongly worded condemnation while carefully avoiding any actual action that might anger the Zephyrian Empire. Most species remembered what had happened to the Altrurians when they had opposed Zephyrian expansion 2 centuries ago. An entire civilization reduced to ash in a matter of weeks. Humanity, it seemed, was on its own. But the Zephyrians had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that because humans were newcomers to interstellar politics, they would respond like every other species, with diplomacy, negotiation, and eventual submission. They had studied human history, but only the sanitized versions available in galactic databases. They knew about the wars, the conflicts, the violence, but they didn't understand the deeper truth about humanity. They didn't understand that humans were the species that had looked at every predator on their homeworld and decided to hunt them instead. Operator Zero's enhanced vision tracked the patrol patterns of Zephyrian fighters as they swept through the space around the station. His augmented mind calculated their movements with mechanical precision, noting the gaps in their coverage, the moments of vulnerability that would last only seconds. "Insertion point identified," he murmured into his comm unit. "Beginning approach." The Nemesis shifted course with movements so subtle they barely registered on the ship's own instruments. Operator Zero had spent months learning to pilot the craft, but the real breakthrough had come when he stopped trying to fly it like a human and started thinking like the machine itself. The ship's AI was sophisticated enough to anticipate his needs, responding to thoughts almost before he had fully formed them. Behind him, in the ship's cargo bay, lay equipment that represented humanity's most advanced military technology. But much of it was decidedly low-tech by galactic standards: projectile weapons, chemical explosives, even sharpened steel. The Zephyrians had shielding that could stop energy weapons and deflect particle beams, but they had never encountered an enemy that would resort to throwing chunks of metal at high velocity. The insertion pod was a marvel of engineering disguised as debris. To any scanning system, it appeared to be nothing more than a chunk of asteroid, its composition and mass perfectly matching the kind of space junk that naturally accumulated around major installations. The pod would carry him through the station's shields without triggering any alarms. As the Nemesis approached the insertion point, Operator Zero completed his final equipment check. His combat suit was a hybrid of human engineering and recovered alien technology, providing protection against energy weapons while maintaining the flexibility he needed for close-quarters combat. The suit's surface could shift its appearance to match any environment, making him effectively invisible to most forms of detection. His primary weapon was deceptively simple: a modified railgun that could fire solid projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The ammunition was equally straightforward: dense tungsten rods that would punch through any known armor. To beings accustomed to energy weapons and force fields, the concept of simply throwing very fast rocks was laughably primitive. They would learn otherwise. The insertion pod detached from the Nemesis with barely a whisper of expelled gas. Operator Zero felt the subtle shift in gravity as the pod's systems activated, adjusting its trajectory to match the orbital debris field surrounding the station. Around him, displays showed the approach vector, the station's defensive grid, and the locations of his primary targets. Commander Vexhai, the being who had overseen the execution, was currently in his private quarters on level 47 of the station. Intelligence suggested he would be alone for the next 3 hours, reviewing reports from the ongoing human hunting operations. It would be the perfect opportunity to begin sending Earth's message to the Zephyrian Empire. The pod struck the station's outer hull with enough force to embed itself in the metal plating, but not enough to trigger any security alerts. Operator Zero waited 30 seconds before activating the cutting laser, carving a hole just large enough for him to slip through. The laser was designed to mimic the kind of damage that might be caused by a micrometeorite, adding another layer of misdirection to his infiltration. Inside the station, he found himself in a maintenance corridor that stretched for hundreds of meters in both directions. The air was thick and humid, designed for Zephyrian physiology rather than human comfort. His suit's environmental systems compensated automatically, filtering the atmosphere and adjusting the temperature to keep him operational. Moving through the station was like navigating a three-dimensional maze. The Zephyrians built their structures according to their own logic, with corridors that twisted and branched in patterns that seemed random to human eyes. But Operator Zero had spent weeks studying the station's layout, memorizing every passage, every access point, every potential escape route. He encountered his first Zephyrian patrol after 15 minutes of careful movement. 3 guards in light armor, their compound eyes scanning the corridors with mechanical precision. They carried energy weapons that could cut through steel, and their chitinous bodies were naturally armored against most forms of attack. They never saw him coming. The first guard died with a tungsten rod through the center of his torso, the projectile moving so fast it passed completely through his body before embedding itself in the wall behind him. The second guard had time to turn before a second shot removed his head with surgical precision. The third managed to raise his weapon before Operator Zero was on him, a monomolecular blade sliding between the joints of his exoskeleton with practiced ease. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 seconds. The bodies were hidden in a storage compartment where they wouldn't be discovered until the next scheduled maintenance cycle, giving him hours of undetected movement through the station. As he progressed deeper into the facility, Operator Zero began leaving his calling cards, small devices, no larger than a coin, attached to critical systems throughout the station. To any scanner, they appeared to be normal components of the station's infrastructure. In reality, they were quantum communicators, linked to similar devices aboard the Nemesis. When the time came, those devices would transform the massive fortress into humanity's weapon. Level 47 was a study in Zephyrian opulence. The corridors were wider here, decorated with trophies from a dozen conquered worlds. Crystalline formations from the glassed ruins of Altruia hung beside weapons taken from the warrior poets of Deneb Prime. In the center of it all was a massive sculpture made from the bones of the last Titan of Proxima Centauri. The Zephyrians collected suffering like other species collected art. Commander Vexhi's quarters were protected by a security system that had never been breached in the station's 50-year history. Energy shields, motion detectors, thermal sensors, and automated defense turrets created a web of protection that could stop an army. The system was designed to detect any known form of attack and respond with overwhelming force. It wasn't designed to detect a human who moved like liquid shadow and thought 3 steps ahead of every sensor. Operator Zero found his target exactly where intelligence had predicted. Vexhi sat behind a desk made from polished asteroid stone, reviewing reports on his personal display. The chamber's walls were covered with recordings from the execution broadcast, playing on endless loop. The Zephyrian commander was watching the deaths of 70,000 humans the way others might watch entertainment. "Commander Vexhi," Operator Zero said quietly, stepping out of the shadows with his railgun trained on the alien's center mass. Vexhi's compound eyes shifted to focus on the intruder, but he showed no sign of fear. "A human. How interesting. You managed to penetrate our security systems. Impressive for a primitive species." "I'm not here to impress you," Operator Zero replied. "I'm here to deliver a message. From your pathetic government, we have already received their pleas for mercy. The Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. The message isn't from my government." Operator Zero's finger tightened on the trigger. "It's from the 70,000 humans you murdered." The tungsten rod took Vexhi's center mass, but Operator Zero had adjusted the weapon's power setting. Instead of punching clean through, the projectile lodged in the commander's exoskeleton, causing massive internal damage but leaving him alive and conscious. Vexhi looked down at the wound with something approaching surprise. Zephyrian biology was remarkably resilient, but the trauma was too severe for even his enhanced healing to repair. He would live for perhaps another hour, long enough to understand what was happening to his precious station. "You think killing one commander will matter?" Vexhai gasped. "There are millions of Zephyrians in this galaxy. We will hunt your species to extinction for this insult." "You're welcome to try," Operator Zero said, pressing a small device against the alien's forehead. "But first, you're going to help me send a message to your empire." The device was a neural transmitter, capable of broadcasting memories directly to any Zephyrian communication network. As it activated, Vexhai's dying thoughts were uploaded and transmitted across the galaxy faster than light. Every Zephyrian commander, every ship captain, every planetary governor would experience the commander's final moments through his own eyes. They would see the face of humanity's response to their brutality. But Operator Zero wasn't finished. As Vexhai died, the quantum communicators throughout the station activated simultaneously. The Kethmore station, pride of the Zephyrian fleet, suddenly found its own defensive systems turning against it. Weapons designed to protect the station began firing on critical structural points. Shield generators overloaded in cascading failures. Life support systems vented atmosphere into space. In the span of 15 minutes, one of the most heavily defended installations in the galaxy transformed into a tomb for its 40,000 occupants. From his position in the command center, Operator Zero watched the destruction with cold satisfaction. The explosions were visible for light years in every direction, a beacon announcing humanity's entry into galactic warfare. As emergency broadcasts flooded Zephyrian communication, the Zephyrian Empire's response was swift and brutal. Within hours of Kethmore Station's destruction, their war fleets were moving toward human space, with orders to glass every world, every station, every ship that bore the mark of humanity. Emperor Zethkalar himself had issued the command from his throne world of Zerion Prime. The human species will be erased from existence. But Operator Zero had vanished like smoke in the solar wind. For 6 months, the galaxy watched as the Zephyrian Empire systematically dismantled human colonies while hunting for the ghost that had destroyed their fortress. Every ship that entered Zephyrian space was scanned, every asteroid belt searched, every nebula combed for signs of the stealth vessel that had delivered humanity's first blow. They found nothing. The nemesis might as well have been a phantom. What they did find were the bodies. On Zerion Prime, in the palace that had stood unconquered for 3,000 years, Emperor Zethkalar discovered the head of Admiral Koravan mounted on a spike outside his private chambers. Koravan had been the architect of the original human colony raids, the being who had suggested making the executions public. His compound eyes stared sightlessly at the Emperor, and carved into his chitinous skull were words in perfect Zephyrian script. Message received. On the industrial world of Keftar, General Mexhul was found dead in his command bunker, surrounded by the bodies of his entire personal guard. Security recordings showed nothing. One moment he was alive, the next he was dead, a tungsten rod through his brain pan. The fortress's defenses hadn't even registered an intrusion. On the mining station of Vorthak, Commander Zexelin simply vanished from his quarters. 3 days later, his remains were discovered in the station's water recycling system, along with a data chip containing detailed information about every human prisoner in Zephyrian custody. The chip was addressed to Earth's government. The pattern was always the same. High-ranking Zephyrians involved in the human extermination campaign would die in impossible circumstances, their deaths serving as both message and warning. The killer left no trace, triggered no alarms, and was gone before anyone realized what had happened. The Empire's finest hunters, beings who had tracked prey across a dozen star systems, found themselves chasing shadows. Their most advanced sensors detected nothing. Their greatest strategists could discern no pattern in the attacks beyond their obvious purpose. The Zephyrians were learning what it meant to be hunted by humanity's perfect predator. On Earth, President Walsh watched the intelligence reports with a mixture of awe and horror. The man they had unleashed was systematically dismantling the Zephyrian command structure, but the cost was becoming apparent. Every successful assassination triggered massive retaliation against human prisoners. For every Zephyrian commander that died, hundreds of human colonists were executed in response. "Madam President," General Chen said quietly, "we're receiving another transmission from the Zephyrian Empire. They're demanding we call off our operative in exchange for the lives of 2 million human prisoners on Kepler 186b. "And if we refuse?" Walsh asked, though she already knew the answer. "They'll execute them all on live broadcast, just like the first 70,000. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood the terrible mathematics of the situation. Operator Zero was inflicting unprecedented damage on the Zephyrian Empire, but every victory came at the cost of innocent lives. Walsh closed her eyes, feeling the weight of millions of lives on her shoulders. "Send a message to Operator Zero. Tell him to stand down." But in the depths of Zephyrian space, aboard the Nemesis, Operator Zero was reading intelligence reports that painted a very different picture. The prisoner camps on Kepler 186b were scheduled for liquidation regardless of his actions. The Zephyrians had already decided to exterminate every human in their territory. They were simply using the executions as psychological warfare. He deleted the stand-down order without responding. The Emperor's throne room on Xerion Prime was a monument to Zephyrian supremacy. The walls were lined with the preserved remains of conquered species, each display marking another civilization that had fallen before the Empire's might. At the center of it all sat the Golden Throne, carved from a single massive crystal that had taken 200 years to mine from the core of a dying world. Emperor Zeth-Kalar was examining reports from his intelligence services when the lights went out. Emergency power activated immediately, bathing the massive chamber in crimson light. The Emperor's 6 arms reached for the weapons built into his throne, but he found himself facing an empty room. His personal guards had vanished without a trace. "Your Imperial Majesty," a voice said from the shadows, speaking perfect Zephyrian with an accent that suggested nobility. "We need to talk." Zeth-Kalar's compound eyes tracked the source of the voice, but saw nothing. "Show yourself, human." Operator Zero stepped into the light, his appearance completely transformed. Gone was the tactical gear and advanced weaponry. Instead, he wore the ceremonial robes of a Zephyrian diplomat, complete with the complex decorative scarring that indicated high rank. To casual observation, he appeared to be a perfectly normal member of the Emperor's court. "Your guards are alive but unconscious," he said conversationally. "I thought we should have this conversation privately." The Emperor's primary hands found the controls for his throne's defensive systems, but nothing happened. Impossible. These systems are hardened against all known forms of electronic warfare. "I didn't use electronic warfare." Operator Zero held up a small device that looked like a child's toy. "I used this. It generates a localized electromagnetic pulse that's precisely tuned to disrupt Zephyrian neural implants. Your guards' cybernetics shut down their nervous systems temporarily. They'll wake up in about an hour with massive headaches." Zeth-Kalar stared at the simple device with growing comprehension. The human hadn't overcome their technology through superior science. He had simply found a weakness that no one had thought to protect against. "What do you want?" the Emperor demanded. "I want you to understand something," Operator Zero replied, settling into a chair that had been reserved for visiting diplomats. "Your empire has existed for 10,000 years. You've conquered 1,000 worlds, enslaved 100 species, and convinced yourselves that you're the apex predators of this galaxy." He paused, studying the alien ruler with the same detached interest a scientist might show for a laboratory specimen. But you've never encountered anything like humanity. Every species you've faced fought you with honor, with codes of conduct, with rules about what constituted acceptable warfare. They tried to match your technology, your numbers, your organized fleets. The human leaned forward slightly, and something in his posture made the Emperor's exoskeleton prickle with instinctive fear. "We don't fight with honor, Your Majesty. We fight to win. And we've been practicing for a very long time." On the displays around the throne room, new images began to appear. Human settlements throughout the galaxy, all presumed destroyed by Zephyrian forces, suddenly came to life. Massive defense installations emerged from underground bunkers. Ships that had been dismissed as civilian transports deployed weapon systems that outclassed anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. "The colonies you destroyed were decoys," Operator Zero explained. "The people you executed were volunteers who knew exactly what they were sacrificing themselves for. Every death, every atrocity, every moment of suffering your empire inflicted was carefully documented and transmitted back to Earth." The Emperor's 6 hands clenched into fists. "You used your own people as bait. We used volunteers who believed in something greater than themselves, just like the 70,000 who died in your first broadcast. They knew what message they were sending, and they accepted the price." More images appeared on the screens. Zephyrian worlds throughout the outer territories were reporting massive system failures. Communication networks were going dark. Military installations were losing contact with high command. The Empire's carefully maintained infrastructure was collapsing from within. "For the past 6 months, while you've been hunting me, my colleagues have been infiltrating every world, every station, every ship in your territory. We've been patient, we've been thorough, and now we're ready to show you what happens when you try to exterminate humanity." The throne room's massive doors burst open as Zeth Kalar's guards rushed in, their weapons trained on the human diplomat. But Operator Zero didn't move. Didn't even seem concerned by the dozens of energy weapons pointed at him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said calmly. "The neural disruptor I used on your guards was just a demonstration. The real weapon is much more interesting." He touched a control on his wrist, and every Zephyrian in the room suddenly stiffened. Their weapons clattered to the floor as they lost control of their motor functions. Their cybernetic implants overwhelmed by signals they couldn't process or resist. "Every Zephyrian in your empire has neural implants," Operator Zero explained as the guards collapsed. "They're what allow your species to function in modern society. Communication networks, memory enhancement, reflexive coordination, very impressive technology." He stood up slowly, his movements casual despite being surrounded by paralyzed enemies. "Also very hackable once you understand how they work. We've had months to study captured implants, to understand their protocols, to develop countermeasures. Right now, every Zephyrian in your empire is experiencing what your guards are feeling: complete loss of voluntary motor control." The Emperor tried to speak but found his vocal cords wouldn't respond. He could only watch as the human walked calmly around the throne room, examining the trophies of conquest with academic interest. "The effect is temporary," Operator Zero continued, "but it should last long enough for our message to be delivered. You see, we've been broadcasting this conversation to every world in your empire. Every Zephyrian citizen, every soldier, every official is watching their supreme ruler rendered helpless by a primitive human." He paused in front of a display case containing the crystallized heart of the last Altrurian poet king. "Your empire was built on the belief that might makes right, that superior technology guarantees victory. But technology is just a tool. What matters is the intelligence and will behind it." The human turned back to face the paralyzed Emperor, and for the first time, Zeth Kalar saw something truly terrifying in the alien's eyes. Not anger, not hatred, but the cold, infinite patience of a species that had climbed to the top of the food chain by outlasting everything that tried to kill them. You wanted to exterminate humanity because you thought we were weak. But here's what you didn't understand. We're not the prey in this scenario. We never were. Earth didn't send me to negotiate or to surrender. Operator Zero activated another device, and the screens around the throne room filled with images of human fleets emerging from hiding throughout the galaxy. Ships that looked nothing like the primitive vessels the Zephyrians had been fighting, bristling with weapons that seemed to bend space itself around their barrels. Earth sent me to deliver your extinction notice. The Zephyrian Empire ends today. The paralysis effect wore off gradually, allowing the Emperor to regain control of his vocal cords. You cannot destroy an empire of 10,000 worlds with a few ships. Watch us! As if summoned by his words, the first explosions began. Zerion Prime's orbital defense platforms, turned against their creators by human infiltrators, began bombarding the planet's surface with their own weapons. Communication relays throughout the system went dark as human viruses consumed the Zephyrian data networks. Military installations that had stood for millennia crumbled under coordinated attacks from within. The galaxy is about to learn what humanity is truly capable of, Operator Zero said, walking toward the throne room's exit. Every species that the Zephyrian Empire has conquered will be free by morning. Every world you've enslaved will know that humans were the ones who broke their chains. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the Emperor who would be the last of his line. And they'll remember that when you tried to exterminate us, we didn't just fight back. We won. The human vanished into the shadows, leaving behind an empire in flames and a galaxy about to witness the rise of humanity's true nature. The Zephyrians had thought they were executing criminals on live broadcast. Instead, they had announced the arrival of Earth's most dangerous children to the stars, Hanels. He made his way back to the insertion pod. The Nemesis was already moving to extract him, its stealth systems hiding it from the chaos erupting around the dying station. The message had been delivered. Now it was time to begin the real work. Across the galaxy, Zephyrian commanders who had received Vex-High's final transmission were experiencing something their species hadn't felt in millennia: fear. They had seen the human's eyes, felt the cold calculation behind his actions, understood that they were dealing with something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The human hadn't killed Vex-High in anger or revenge. He had done it with the same methodical precision that a farmer might use to cull livestock. To him, they weren't conquerors or overlords. They were simply problems to be solved. And humanity, as the galaxy was about to learn, was very good at solving problems. Lai murdered the colonists while the galaxy watched. Some alien species turned off their receivers, unable to stomach the brutality. Others watched with fascination, curious to see how this new species would die. None of them understood that they weren't watching an execution. They were watching the birth of something that would haunt the galaxy for generations to come. As the last human prisoner fell silent, Vex-High turned to address the cameras one final time. This is the fate that awaits all who oppose the Zephyrian Empire. Surrender your colonies, humans of Earth, or watch as we hunt down every one of your kind among the stars. The broadcast ended with the image of the execution ground, littered with bodies under the alien suns. But in the depths of space, aboard a ship that didn't appear on any official registry, Operator Zero was already moving towards Zephyrian space. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and the galaxy had no idea what it had awakened.